On a mysterious tropical island, a fisherman leads a peaceful life, catching fish and battling the demons of his past.
I quit! Yeah!
Baker Dill is a solitary fisherman living on the tropical island of Plymouth. He owns a small boat and makes a living by offering wealthy clients the chance to go out to sea and catch fish. One day, while out on the open water, Baker and his companion Duke notice a bird flying low, as if warning them of a potential catch. The fishermen can literally feel that their prize is nearby and dream of landing a massive tuna. Baker is obsessed with the idea and is determined to catch the fish that has slipped away from his hook multiple times. The fishing line slowly tightens, but Duke notices that the tuna is acting cleverly, avoiding the bait. It seems to know it's being hunted, circling its would-be captors. When the tuna finally grabs the bait and tries to dive toward the ocean floor, Baker steps in, ready to try again. After 3 failed attempts, the fisherman uses all his strength and skill to land the fish. By the rules of the tourist trip, Baker is supposed to chum the water and then hand the rod over to the wealthy clients, but for him, this has become a matter of principle. He puts on special gear to anchor himself to the rod, becoming fixated on the possibility of catching the tuna. The wealthy clients are outraged by his audacity and refuse to pay for the fishing trip, as they aren't receiving the promised service. Baker loses control, threatening them with a knife and ordering them not to interfere. With his focus back on the tuna, he struggles to keep it hooked. The battle between fishermen and fish goes on for hours, but eventually, the tuna begins to tire. Baker asks Duke to help reel in the line so he can hook the tuna. It seems like his dream is finally within reach, but at the last moment, the fish slips free. Baker is humiliated in front of the tourists and earns nothing for the trip. All the while, a strange man in glasses has been watching from afar. Eager to meet Baker, he crosses the bay and heads to the dock. This would be nearly impossible, as Baker retreats to the lonely Constance, always ready to take the handsome fisherman in and make love to him. Aware of his financial troubles and the failed fishing trip, she offers him some cash for gas and fishing gear. Baker is sincerely grateful, as Constance is the only person who can listen to him and offer support during tough times. He confides in her, telling her that he no longer wants to fish with Duke. In Baker's eyes, Duke is bad luck, unlike Constance's son, whose fishing trips were always profitable. Later, the fisherman heads to the only bar on the island to have a drink and relax. With some money in his pocket, he buys a drink for an old drunk and begins to make plans for catching the tuna. The bartender and others mock him, doubting that the tuna even exists. Baker ignores the teasing, confident that sooner or later, he will catch the fish he has named Justice. That evening, Baker gives Duke part of the money as payment, knowing that Duke needs it for his granddaughter's college tuition. The next morning, the fisherman wants to go back out to sea, not for profit, but for another attempt at catching the elusive tuna. Duke is skeptical, but prays to God for his friend to finally achieve his simple, yet important, dream. Upon returning home, Baker shoos away Constance's cat, hoping it will return to its owner. At night, he struggles to sleep, haunted by memories of his son, with whom he can't be. The next morning, Baker and Duke set out again, but once again, they fail to track down the tuna. Duke suggests selling the bait to a fish buyer to at least minimize their financial loss, but Baker refuses. He throws the fish and bait overboard, angering his friend. In the heat of the moment, Baker admits that Duke is bad luck and that he no longer wants to work with him. In reality, he has good intentions and wants his friend to find a better job, but can't bring himself to tell him this. Their conversation ends in a quarrel, and Duke walks away. That evening, Baker goes back to the bar to drink, ignoring the bartender's jokes. He doesn't want to see the shaman and doesn't believe she can help him catch the tuna. At the same time, he's happy that Duke has found a higher paying job. Their conversation is interrupted when Karen, Baker's ex-wife, walks in. She generously pays for their drinks and asks to speak with him privately about something important. Constance watches the couple leave for the boat, feeling jealous but unable to interfere with their conversation. During their meeting, it's revealed that Baker is not his real name. His true name is John Mason. He was a soldier who fought in the Iraq War, and afterward, he couldn't return to his former life or family. Fleeing from his obligations, he changed his name and stayed on the forgotten island, where his only dream is to catch a massive tuna. Karen is not trying to reconcile. She came to the island for help. Her current husband, Frank, is not only fabulously wealthy and a criminal figure tied to the Cuban mafia, but also an alcoholic. He regularly abuses alcohol and violently beats both Karen and their son, Patrick, whom Baker shares with her. Baker is unconcerned about his ex-wife's fate but is deeply worried about the safety of his son. Unfortunately, it's impossible for Patrick to escape the violence at home. He's a brilliant mathematician and programmer, spending his days locked in his room, working on a game. The plot of the game is unknown, but Patrick refuses to leave his laptop, as it's the only way to avoid interacting with his abusive stepfather. Karen asks Baker to stage an accident during a fishing trip and eliminate her husband, promising him $10 million in return. Unable to compromise his conscience or humanity, Baker rejects her offer and sends her away. As soon as Karen leaves the boat, the mysterious man in glasses hurries toward him, but Baker doesn't hear him. and sails off into the night for another fishing trip. Returning home only at dawn, Baker encounters Constance. She's uninterested in the fact that he's caught a decent haul and made some money. She's jealous of Karen, the beautiful ex-wife. She presses him about his relationship with Karen, wondering if he plans to go back to her. Baker avoids the uncomfortable questions and leaves for the cliffs to take a swim. Once in the water, he hears his son's voice, which starts to unsettle him. At one point, he sees an image of Patrick and swims toward it, but to no avail. A few hours later, Frank arrives on the island by private jet. His premature appearance frightens Karen, as she no longer feels safe around him. Frank orders her to remove any excess clothing and inspects her body, discovering several scratches. He becomes enraged that her skin isn't perfect and brutally beats her, an incident that soon spreads throughout the island, including to Baker. In response, the fisherman changes his approach to work, focusing now on earning money. He discards the idea of catching the tuna and buys regular fishing hooks to catch fish he can sell to a dealer. Soon after, Karen and Frank visit Baker to arrange a tourist fishing trip for the next morning. Baker refuses to accommodate Frank, explaining that the trip requires at least 2 people as per regulations. Frank doesn't accept the refusal and promises to pay generously for the experience. He threatens Baker with a gun, hinting that disobedience is not an option. After the conversation, Baker heads back out to sea, unaware that the mysterious man in glasses and a business suit is still following him. The stranger is shocked to find that Baker has left the pier earlier than expected and wonders why he couldn't meet with the fisherman. Baker eventually finds and returns Constance's cat, then spends time with a lonely woman. She senses that he still has feelings for the beautiful Karen and provocatively asks him which is more important to him, the tuna or Karen. Baker leaves without answering. The next morning, Duke meets Baker and informs him that Frank is willing to pay $10,000 for the tourist fishing trip. Duke is willing to take only $2,000 for his granddaughter's tuition and begs Baker not to turn down such a tempting offer. Baker agrees to bring Duke along, but only under the condition that Duke will keep him from giving in to temptation. Baker secretly harbors thoughts of killing Frank and is willing to do it for free, but his conscience prevents him from acting on it. He warns Karen that they will return from the fishing trip together, and nothing will happen to her husband. While on a fishing trip, Baker decides to take advantage of the fact that Frank doesn't know anything about him. He asks personal questions and soon realizes that the wealthy man is a disgusting person, willing to cheat on his wife with any easily accessible girl on the island. At the same time, Frank despises his adopted son, born to some unknown loser. In Frank's eyes, Patrick is a psycho who can't be considered a real guy because he refuses to play any male sports. The boy is obsessed with computers and plays a strange fishing game. Baker is enraged by every word Frank says. He wants to punch him or throw him overboard, but their conversation is interrupted by a shark they catch on the line. Baker tries to hold onto the fish, but the rich man reminds him that according to the rules of tourist fishing, he should be the one to catch it. Baker agrees and hands the rod and gear over to Frank. At one point, the shark begins pulling Frank and it seems like Baker will let it drag him to the bottom, but that doesn't happen. At the last moment, Duke and Baker help Frank catch the shark. Frank suggests they repeat the fishing trip and pays the promised money for the fun. Karen again asks Baker to deal with Frank, but he ignores her. Duke sees everything that's going on and later that evening decides to talk to his friend. Baker admits that Karen is his ex-wife. He was in Iraq, where he did horrible things, and he couldn't return to his old life. Believing it would be better this way, Baker abandoned his family and moved to the island, struggling with the ghosts of his past. The fisherman talks about Karen's request and admits that he'd like to fulfill it. He's willing to go fishing with Frank alone to get rid of him once and for all. Duke disagrees, as he believes in God and that God is watching over them. That night, Baker returns to the boat and hears his son's voice. A few minutes later, his wife arrives, trying to convince him to change his mind. She tries to seduce her ex-husband, and at one point, he gives in. Noticing dozens of scars on her back, Baker realizes that people don't change and Karen came to him out of desperation. He doesn't want anything to do with his wife, but he's ready to help his son, who suffers from an abusive stepfather. At the same time, the couple gives in to old feelings and makes love, after which they discuss their plan to eliminate Frank. When they return home, Baker meets a mysterious man in a suit who has been trying to get an appointment with him for days. Reed Miller is the head of sales at a small company that sells products needed for fishing. Despite the late hour, he insists on a conversation, claiming it's urgent. Reed won't take no for an answer, as he knows Baker's schedule down to the minute. The salesman has come to offer a brand new ultrasonic fish finder that will help catch that prize tuna. The company is willing to give it to him for free in exchange for a glowing review from a dedicated fisherman. At some point, Reed's speech becomes more strange and suspicious. He admits that he knows too much about Baker, including his plans for tomorrow. Baker attacks the salesman with a knife and threatens him, but then learns the truth. Under pressure, Reed confesses that he's part of a game, and his job is to enforce the rules. They are in an imaginary world, a computer game created by an unknown person. Plymouth Island is just computer code, and everything happening is the result of the game's artificial intelligence. The one rule that has never changed is that no one can harm another person or take their life. Considering all of this nonsense, Baker kicks Reed out. The next morning, Baker wakes up a little before the alarm and notices he can't get out of bed, as if he's glued to it. When the alarm rings, the feeling disappears, which seems strange. Baker thinks the conversation with Reed was just a nightmare, but when he finds Reed's business card, he realizes it was real. Trying to figure out if he's really in a game, Baker looks for a map of the world. He only sees one island and understands that Reed was telling the truth. Everything around him is part of a game. Baker suspects that the creator of the game is Patrick, since they went fishing together last time but didn't catch anything. Soon, Baker meets Samson, Constancia's son, with whom he fished before. The guy always brought good luck and is ready to go fishing, but Baker doesn't take him along. The game has changed, and so have the rules. His only goal now is to get rid of Frank. In the store, he talks to the saleswoman and asks her a question that goes beyond the game. The woman can't answer, then returns to talking in codes, which only confirms Reed's words. Duke meets Baker and asks him to stop, warning him not to cross the line of humanity. Instead of paying for his granddaughter's education, Duke spent all his money to pay off some thugs. They beat up Frank badly, breaking his arm and ribs. Duke thinks that's enough revenge and that Baker shouldn't commit a crime. The fisherman is angry with his friend because Duke is breaking the game's rules and interfering with his plan, so he kicks him out. Meanwhile, Karen finds her beaten husband in a blood-soaked bathroom and helps him get up. She would like to forget him once and for all but is forced to support him so Frank won't return to beating her once his arm heals. As Baker starts breaking the game's protocols, everyone around him advises him to see a doctor. They follow the rules and offer their support, but everything going on frustrates him. At some point, he completely gives up, not knowing what the right thing to do is in this situation. Baker gets drunk and steps outside the game's usual scenarios. Escaping from everyone, he ends up on the shore, where he meets Reed. The man who had been enforcing the rules of the game understands that the creator has changed them. The only thing they can do now is accept the new reality and follow Patrick's new instructions. Baker realizes that it's his son who wants him to get rid of Frank once and for all. He agrees to the new terms of the game and hurries to the dock, where Frank and Karen are already waiting. Karen managed to get Frank to go fishing, so as not to break her promise. He's struggling to stand due to the alcohol and painkillers, which works to Baker and Karen's advantage. Constancia, Duke, and the others watch as the ex-spouses drag the wealthy man onto the boat and head out for the tourist fishing trip. Out in the open sea, Baker is ready to get rid of Frank. He scatters shark bait and asks them to put a vest on Frank, which will attach him to the fishing line and a predator capable of dragging him to the bottom of the sea. It seems like the plan is perfect, and nothing can go wrong, when suddenly it turns out that Samson has snuck onto the boat to help Baker catch a tuna. The witness is of no use to the ex-spouses, so Baker comes up with another task for the boy and sends him to the cabin. Karen can no longer wait and is ready to stab her tyrant husband in the heart, but the plan is disrupted when the tuna gets caught on the hook. Baker realizes that this is the same tuna and quickly grabs the fishing rod to try to catch it. Karen is shocked that at such a crucial moment, the fisherman is thinking about his catch. Baker has accepted the new rules of the game created by Patrick, so he hands the rod to Frank. Before letting go of it, he tells his son's stepfather that he has named the tuna Justice. As soon as the fisherman lets Frank stay alone with the tuna, the fish instantly drags the drunkard and scoundrel to the bottom of the sea. Karen and Baker pretend to be concerned about what happened, so Samson doesn't suspect them of collusion. In the real world, Patrick decides to leave his room, but only to do the same thing his father did in the video game. Taking his father's knife, the boy heads downstairs to execute his stepfather, who had been regularly abusing him and his mother. It turns out that Baker Dill is a computer character created by Patrick in memory of his late father, John Mason. In reality, John didn't return from Iraq and lost his life in 2006. His mother remarried, but Frank turned out to be a sadist, regularly beating her and her adopted son. Patrick endured for a long time, shutting himself off and trying to shield himself from violence with a video game, but it didn't work. Depression, despair, and moral pressure led the 13-year-old boy to commit a crime. The court learned that Frank was a sadist, so it ruled that the boy's actions were self-defense and soon released him into his mother's custody. Baker received the promised $10 million from Karen, money that could change his life. Soon after, he got a call from his son, who had found a way not only to contact his deceased father but also to meet him. The boy changes the game and reprograms the world so that he and his father can meet again, this time going fishing together. How could the simulation have been utilized for a more constructive approach to conflict resolution? Rather than crafting a scenario focused on revenge, the simulation could have provided a platform for analyzing and exploring alternative solutions. What led to the decision to replicate the conflict, instead of modeling different behavioral choices and potential outcomes? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.